Thank you. What is it about change that's so hard? When I think about the 30 plus years that I've been working with families who are raising kids with autism, I think the most frequent question that I've ever been asked is, the transition from the beginning after diagnostics, the transitions through daily life, the changes that sometimes the service system inherently sort of imposes on us in order to access services, these sort of transitions. You turn 3, you move on to something different. You graduate from high school, you move on to something different. And I think in the daily sort of work of raising kids with autism, there are very few days that go by that families don't necessarily experience something around change that kind of shakes the day a little bit, maybe makes it a little bit more difficult to get through. And what I'm interested in talking with you about today is, what is it about change that happens? What's the nature of change that kind of causes us to stop, or causes our kids to stop, or kind of really leads to those moments of distress? And in thinking about how to support families and give them an advice on that, I sort of hit a dry spot where deep breathing, suggestions around specifically what to do in those moments, or the kind of strategies as a teacher that I offered to people, we sort of hit a place where it didn't always work. And so it really made me start thinking more about how can we think of what is the nature of change, what makes it difficult for people, and I mean for all people, and how can something that is so natural, that is so a part of life, we start out as babies, we hopefully end up as old people, the word natural doesn't necessarily suggest pain-free. I think of natural childbirth, for any of the women in the audience who've chosen that, as I did, as a path, and then halfway through said, what was I thinking? There's nothing inherently in nature bad about change. We assume it's going to happen, but at the same time, it's really important, I think, to recognize that doesn't mean it's necessarily without pain or discomfort. Along with that discomfort, though, transitions and changes really offer us this opportunity to think about what our choices are. They give us an opportunity for ourselves and for our kids to help practice what happens when we hit discomfort. How can we acknowledge that discomfort and not necessarily avoid it? Especially for those changes where it's like all those expressions, the horse is out of the barn, the train has left the station. It's going to happen. So there's a point at which when deep breathing is not enough, we have to kind of think, can we use how we use our minds, or change our minds to think about influencing change, or accepting change, or working with change in a more positive way? So I'm a behavior analyst and a special education teacher by training. I can't do anything without defining it. The dictionary is my friend. And what I noticed as I went through this is that I thought, okay, to start to talk about, where's my dot? Oh, it's over there, sorry. I'm appreciative that Madeline helped me understand why I'm so irritated with my children and their video gaming. Because I'm in that boomer box. I'm like, oh, hard work? Where's the hard work in this? So that's why my laser, there it goes, I got it. So when you look at the definition of transition, there's nothing inherently negative in these things. It's about passage, it's about change, it's about this process that we all go through as human beings. It's about, who could argue with development? Evolution, there's arguments about evolution, but evolution is what got us here. I love the idea of musical modulation. It's this whole idea of how does one chord, I'm not a musician, but how does it blend into the next chord? It's about connection. It's about leading from one piece to another. And then we get down here and you're like, oh, there it is. This whole idea of abrupt change particularly kind of shifts what's happening in the particular system, and that there's an inherent loss or gain within change. So no matter how excited you are, or how worried you are about what's happening next, understanding that one of the reasons we hit that place of discomfort is that inherent in change there is both loss and gain. So this is an image I want you to keep in your mind, because you're gonna pull it up, hopefully like a little video, as we move through. So it's that moment where change is activated. So bowl's too small, bigger bowl, seems like a really good idea. And look at all the momentum here. This is like New Year's resolutions. It's January 1st, I'm going to the gym, and then you're like, this is like February. And you're like, oh God, what have I done? There's that moment of no going back. Change has been activated. And I don't think it's actually the change in it itself, because I think this looks like a good idea to move into a bigger bowl. It's tight, there's not as much room. It's that moment where change has activated. I'm a little worried, I've got some momentum going, and it's less about the change and more about what's here, or actually what's not here, which is that sense of groundlessness. And I think particularly for individuals who have autism, at least what I've heard from people that I've worked with, both from kids, families, and teens and young adults, is this whole idea of, if I approach the world in a way where predictability and sameness helps me, it helps me navigate through the world, and this is true for a lot of us, is that sense of space here, and groundlessness is actually the part about change that is so challenging. And that's really what I want to talk about today, is how do we support our kids, how do we work with our own minds around the process of change so that we understand that it's not that this is good and this is bad, it's this whole process of how do we work with discomfort. How do we work with that place when you get to in everybody's lives where it's just not quite as easy as it used to be. It's harder. It's harder maybe even than what you expected. So 4 words that I hope that you can take away with you today is this whole idea of evidence, expectations, essential skills, and enjoyment. And in the beginning, when you first receive a diagnosis of autism for your child, there's this, I don't know if it feels like a train that you're getting on, but this process that then starts to unfold in that you look in front of you and you see the same kid that you've been seeing for, the national average for, I think, diagnostics is unfortunately at 4 or 5. But whatever age at which you've pulled a team together and you've come to that conclusion, all of this array of opportunity and options, and I think what we hear from a lot of families is a lot of confusion is presented to you. And the whole idea of being able to tap into the evidence as you make those decisions, that's the first big change that comes for a family. It's in a significant transition from sort of what you thought maybe life was going to be and now what you know more about what life will be. And again, I've done this work for a really long time, and I am completely, on a daily basis, sort of dazzled by the way in which the autism community has changed and the way in which we have responded to, the 1 in 68 that Stephen was talking about. We've never lived in a time in which there were more options. And that's sometimes actually what makes it hard, is there are so many options now. The whole idea of tapping into the evidence means that we have people that are working really hard to help us think about what has been useful. We've done that from a research base, we've done that from a clinical application base, we've done that by paying attention to what's been helpful in the schools, and often we've figured that out by listening to what's really been helpful for families. So those partners that I just described have come to this place about now talking about evidence-based strategies. As often happens, I think, for humans, is we started talking about evidence-based strategies as options when you're trying to figure out treatment and support for your child. And then there's publications and manuals that then come forward to say, here is what we found out when we looked at the research about what's been effective with kids with autism. The problem is we like lists. We like this idea of somebody's going to hand me a list, and then from that list, I'm going to check off and choose the things that I want to use. And what I want to offer to people to think about today is that in making decisions as a parent or as a clinician or as a teacher about how to intervene and support a child with autism isn't about pulling something off a list. It's about a process. And recognizing that there are partners in that process. I'm sorry, I'm going to step forward, but then you can't hear me. I'm trying not to hit it, but it's like, I'm Italian, I use my hands. This whole idea of evidence-based means an external source has given us some good information to say that this has been effective with other kids who have similar issues. But the process part is we also have to be thinking about what's really important to this particular family. who is this individual with autism? And then because as providers we partner with families, we have to also pay attention to the clinical expertise of people who do this as a practice. So in thinking about that huge big change that comes and that big transition that comes, I really encourage people to be thinking about that whole idea of what does evidence-based mean? How do I use evidence-based resources like this manual from Frank Porter Graham in North Carolina? A really amazing group of people came together. They've done this twice now. They reviewed it and then came back 2 years later and added and revised. I have a resource sheet at the back at the table out front, so people you can take this link with you. And I know that this will also be available online to allow yourself to start to look into where is my own contribution as a parent into this whole idea of these are evidence-based strategies that have been effective with other kids, but how is this relative to my family? Where is this going to fit? We have no intention of creating treatment or intervention or supports for kids with autism that are cookie cutter. Because you know that old adage, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. That we can't make assumptions that everything is going to work for everybody. There could be an amazing research project that showed outstanding results that isn't necessarily going to be a good fit for a particular family. The other idea I want you to take away and be thinking about more today is, I don't know quite how we got to the place where, I don't know, I need to think about sort of the history of how we've supported families. How do we get to the idea that if you have autism or you have a developmental disabilities that parents should stop having expectations for you? I mean, I don't know how we got there, but that's sometimes the message that I hear back from families, is that my understanding of how this kid operates in the world means that I have to not ever expect him to sit at the table. I have to expect him to never be able to do chores. I have to expect him to never be able to fill in the blank. And really what I want to encourage people to think about is expectations are tricky because you need some expectations, but you also want to be able to manage those. You don't want to necessarily say, well, he's 5, so he's going to do what every 5-year-old does. He's going to go to kindergarten the same way every 5-year-old does. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is he gets to go to kindergarten, and then it's our job to figure out where that fit is and how are we then going to support that child to be able to access what is a typical and a natural activity for all kids their age. I think there's so much variation with us as humans and how we learn and how we experience things that hopefully we're doing that accommodation and paying attention at that level for all kids. But if you receive a diagnosis and then you sort of abandon that idea that we're going to go to a Badger game and we're going to go to a movie someday, I'm not saying that getting to those things I'm not suggesting that has to be easy, but what I'm encouraging, particularly for parents to think about, is that's part of your role in those partnerships that I talked about, is this remind us as providers about what's important to you. Remind us about what are the expectations in your family for everybody. You know, you don't get to hit people. You have to do chores. You have to clean your plate after dinner. Somebody needs to feed the dog. And the important part of this is it's about preparation for life. And sometimes when we hit those transition points, we run into challenges because we've missed a piece, which is, have we been thinking about ways in which we really want to make sure that our child and family can still participate? Maybe that's in ways that we not how we expected it to be, but that we're talking with teachers, we're talking with autism treatment providers about the kind of expectations that you would have no matter who this child was, however they came wired in the world, and that you help us remember that those are really important to you. And then part of the way that you can really be thinking about it, like, okay, Molly, what do you mean? How do I figure out what my expectations should be for this child? Is there's some really wonderful work that has been done. Pat McGreevy, who's in Florida, and Pat Fry, who's now in Indiana, have done some work around developing curriculum for the 2% of our population of people with developmental disabilities who have really significant needs for support. So it's the kind of kids that often don't fit in easily with a school curriculum, and schools really, I struggled even as a special ed teacher about how are we going to help this child learn things that are going to be really useful to them in the long run. And so I did a workshop with them. They're both behavior analysts, so they tend to think about teaching really in steps. And in response to what kind of expectations can I have? I think we need to look back at what are we teaching kids. And what McGreevy and Fry did was help me think about what are essential skills. So I'm a person who's operating within a family. I'm somebody who will contribute to relationships and friendships. I'm somebody who, this isn't about getting a graduate degree and becoming a rocket scientist. This is, if we did a scan of this whole room, how much have we had opportunity even for ourselves to be able to learn this? And I think it's the gap where we sometimes miss with kids with autism. We're so sort of caught up in pushing forward and moving that development or trajectory that we stop and think about no matter what your IQ is, what are the things that are important in your life as a human being so that you can contribute, that you can participate. And I love thinking about these because they don't have to do with how well you can talk, even as well, not even as, people who are using a wheelchair. I mean, there's ways in which we can look at giving our kids opportunities to really learn these essential skills so that it's part of that foundation we're building, so that when you get to the point of transitions and you go back to that picture of the fish where there's that place of discomfort, what can you bring to that? Again, it's not just about teaching your child to breathe when they're stressed. That can be helpful in some situations, but what about if they know how to let you know what they need? Whether that's a picture system, whether that's touching your hand, whether that's telling you in full sentence and telling you more than you really want to know. It's this idea of that we start to prioritize this idea of essential skills for kids so that when change comes and transitions come, we don't blame it on autism. I've been through so many diagnostic DSM, I think I started at DSM 1 and we're like at 5 now. I mean, I've been through so many permutations of how we think about even diagnosing this that we used to call it need for sameness. And I'm like, me too. I don't know, give me a different day on a range from 1 to 10, me too. So instead of thinking of it as Madeline was saying, a pathological part of this disability, why don't we instead say change is going to happen, change is a part of the human experience, how do I better equip myself as a parent, and how do I better equip my child to be sturdier, to be able to put some focus on how do you expect people to get good at stuff if we don't give them a chance to practice. So being able to initiate communication, think about it, how amazing of a life skill that is. I want you to know something, and I know that I can initiate with you. Responsivity, there's this whole thing that people like it when you say something or look at them or talk or do something to give them some indication that you've interacted with them. Letting people what you know, what you want and need. I think sharing your interests is huge. Paula Kluth is a professor and teacher who's a real advocate of inclusion, and she's written some wonderful books. One, I love the title, it's something about a whale. Anybody know? Just Give Them the Whale. So again, I'm not saying make life, for your prince and your princess all perfect, but it's this idea of how do we start to share interest? How do we teach kids that's something that you actually want to encourage people to do, and that we have to be reciprocal in that. We have to also be willing to share our interests with our kids. Offering help and accepting help. Who here hasn't been in a situation where you haven't wanted to ask for help and that miracle person comes along and actually offers it to you? Can we be teaching our kids that's again, it's a way. Because you have autism or have a disability doesn't mean you can't contribute, doesn't mean that there isn't some expectation that you have something to offer. Cooperation and participation. Participation doesn't mean you have to do it alone. It doesn't mean you have to have a certain skill set that I'm going to check off that says you now have the cognition and ability to independently be able to do this. Participation means you get to show up, you get to be there, and you get to be a part of it. Turn taking. I love to watch, just even when you're at work, how much people take turns. You're like, ooh, that happened. It's constant. We can't stop. See, I talk, you laugh. That's turn taking. Sharing. Again, that's probably the top of the list of the other question about my child has challenges with transitioning. How do you, from a really early age with kids, so that we don't expect a 15-year-old now to be okay with us taking away a preferred item when we haven't started early on to have sharing really for us as both families and providers to really be promoting that as an essential skill. How about saying no? I was working with a little guy yesterday And I watched him, and he, yes, never came out of his mouth. No came out of his mouth about 100 times. And I thought, good for you, you know, that we're wired as humans, that we start with no. Because we're looking at lifelong skill. So I don't want to teach a kid not to say no, because then they're no longer safe. I would rather have a kid learn to say no and advocate with me, and then we're going to work it out and negotiate it, as opposed to thinking, again, because you have an autism or a developmental disability, that somehow that's not an important skill for you. And it's also really important to accept no. Sometimes it's just no. Sometimes there's a research article, I love this. It's called 3 Ways to Say No by Saying Yes. And I thought, wow, is that really possible? But it was a great way to sort of desensitize kids who do trigger and react to no, to gradually get them more used to, over time, this whole idea of sometimes it is going to be no. And then how about waiting? You know, when I think back sort of about the fish picture and that whole idea of that moment of discomfort, how many of us have known and are raising kids who have a really hard time waiting? Does anybody have waiting on their IEP? Thank you. Yours or your child's? Both. Okay. Really good. I want to talk to you after. And the last one is, I can't, you know, I'm raising now, I have a 17-year-old and a 21-year-old, so I'm missing the smaller children because they were a lot easier for me. But this whole idea of do your job. How do we expect them at, you know, that transition point? But what if that fish was jumping into adulthood? Like, okay, you're 21, time for a job. You'd be like, what? Nobody told me this? That whole idea of what does a job mean for a 2-year-old? What does a job mean for a 3-year-old? And, you know, there was a great line. I have to give credit to a comedian. I think it's Goldman, Gary Goldman, and he said, "Life is hard, and then you have to do it every day." Like, that's what your job is. Starting with kids earlier, so that point at which they're making that leap, or we're helping them make that leap, that they have more ability and tolerance and patience around things aren't just quite right. And the last one is my favorite, which is all of the things that I heard Segan talking about, all of the things I heard Madeline talking about. Every time a family shares a story with us, none of this is intended to suggest that any of this is easy. So the solution to that, for how hard it is what's the other side of the equation, is enjoyment. Next year I'm going to ask who has enjoyment on their IEP, because, you know, it's a fundamental part of building human relationship in which we enjoy and understand and have an interest in each other. So, you know, it's not always about going to a social skills group. It's about this idea of, within the context of our own families, are we appreciating and fostering likes and dislikes? Someday I'm going to know why trains are so important to young kids with autism. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because they go in a line. I don't know if there's something about it that's particularly appealing. Someday I hope to understand that. But what I do know is it's been really helpful to build relationships that I'm interested in trains. I have a 17-year-old gamer. Madeline, again, thank you. You helped me understand it was a good thing to drive around with her car and listen to the point I was mildly nauseous about Overwatch, because she lives there now. Really fostering that sense of, and again, this is never intended to be single direction. We can be helping our kids both understand, we can understand more about and support their likes and dislikes, and we can also help them appreciate how that is true for us. It's critically important, if you're going to help somebody through a change and you're going to help somebody through a transition, to understand what's motivating for them. What is worth it to get out of bed in the morning? What is worth it to do this thing that somebody's asking you to do and you're experiencing a little bit discomfort? How can we help redirect our lens and our filter for kids towards something that is going to be meaningful and motivating to them, and not put so much attention on that period of discomfort? Joining high interest in activities is similar to appreciating likes and dislikes, but it's not just the appreciating it and encouraging it, it's the actual joining in it, being willing to be a part of things that are interesting to each other. And I think the last one is so important, is this whole idea, someone else mentioned, I think Segan mentioned humor. I feel like it's the glue of humans. The best relationships I'm in are the ones that make me laugh, the people that I feel like I can let down enough. And in the midst of all of what's so hard, just about parenting in general, let alone raising a child in which you now also have to manage a school system and a service system, there have to be places in which we really prioritize laughter and playfulness. And then I just wanted to end with a quote from one of my heroes, Fred Rogers, who I think has been an incredible advocate for childhood and for play and for families and for diversity. Often when you think you're at the end of something, you're at the beginning of something else. So I encourage you, be an advocate. Think about, allow yourself to consider the possibility that even though these things are happening and maybe moving forward in ways that you didn't plan, if you can think about, how do I build my ability to move through discomfort? How can I help myself and my family and my child when I experience those moments of groundlessness? I think it gives us this chance so that maybe eventually we'll get to the place with families of kids with autism where we start teaching this sooner so that they don't have to reach that place where transitions and challenges, we think of it as a toolkit where we can help equip them so that it doesn't have to be as much of a daily struggle. Questions? Hi.
Hi, question and a comment. Actually, I'll do the comment first.
Yeah.
The comment is that myself am on the spectrum. I'm a self-advocate. I also have a master's degree and an employee here at the Weizmann Center. Okay. And what you said about expectations really spoke to me in that I really feel that a large measure of my successes in life have come from the fact that my parents not only had expectations of me, but modeled for me how to have expectations of myself, to have internalized values rather than just responding to externalized pressures.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
That's the comment. The question is that, in my experiences as somebody on the spectrum, change is often been difficult, not only because of uncertainty, but also because of the loss of attachments that I thought were stable, or challenging, or loss of identity due to change. Can you comment on whether you've seen that in other individuals, or how that might otherwise impact them?
I think you sort of crystallized exactly what it is about change that can be so painful. Is that loss and gain was at the bottom of that slide, but at the same part, I could have made those letters big, because it is true that there's grief that comes with change, there's loss that comes from change, and I think the strategy that I've seen families use most effectively, and even individuals, is that moment in which we don't ignore that. We acknowledge it, we have a compassionate response to it, and then we find a way to almost recalibrate. So once the change is coming, your choices are, you sort of sit in the muck, or you find you grab your arrow and you find some way and support from people to help you pull you towards what's next.
Hi. You had spoke a lot about the evidence that you receive once your child is diagnosed, and it is a ton of evidence.
Yes.
And I struggled greatly with what do I do with this evidence, and people expecting me to know what will best help my child.
Mm-hmm.
And I've become so frustrated at times because I'm like, I am not an expert. I'm looking to you to help me. Do you have guidance for parents on that ocean of evidence that you find, and how to narrow it down and locate the best services for your child?
Right. Yeah, it's a really good question. And so the link that I shared with you has become a PDF that I probably use weekly. It was developed by a core group of professionals who I have confidence in. And I think there's, any evidence could be disputed from either side. So I go out on a limb a little bit saying this, because somebody could pop up in the back and say, well, I know Sam Odom, and he actually, there could be some discrepancy that could be created there, but you have to start somewhere. So what it does, which I really like, and my favorite part of this document, is the pages in the back. So there's all this graphs and things, and how they looked at, the gold standard of, randomly controlled studies and all of that. Not to dismiss that, but it's the section in the back which is gold, the real gold for me, which is single pages that describe all different kinds of intervention. So video modeling and all of the things that we hear about that are, there's a description of ABA, there's a description of naturalistic early intervention. So I would offer that to families as a resource. If you have time and energy to choose one, that would be where I would start. But I think the other really important part of the process is in a partnership, and I've heard this refrain from families so much over the years, is you go to a meeting and they're like, so what do you want to do? You're like, I don't know. You're the one with a PhD, you tell me. And I think that that's a problem. And that what I encourage people to keep in mind is in addition to accessing information about evidence-based practice that is usable and information to you, because we have the internet now, because it's all out there, maybe too much of it. I need to stand away. I can't because I can't hear you. Sorry. Is to sit down and write down your family priorities. What do I want for my kid? What is my kid telling me that they want? I think you're a lovely example of ways in which parents can support people by both modeling and helping kids articulate, this is what's important to you. So that's what I would suggest you go into a treatment planning meeting or into an IEP is, what's important to you? And I think evidence, any amazing research shouldn't trump that. Shouldn't be, oh, well, we can't do that because we don't have an evidence base for it. Because really what you're offering is not the strategy. You're saying, this is what's important to us as a family. So help me align treatment with what's important to us as a family. Help me align my kid's educational program with the things that I want to help him and us move towards. So.
I think we're going to try and stick to our timeline today. So let's thank Molly one more time.
Thank you. Ruth, can I say one more thing? So what I didn't get to talk about today is what I've been doing now for 2.5 years, which is have this amazing team in which we've been developing autism treatment here at the Wasteman Center. Hooray! And we have some handouts out there. There's contact information. We're offering programming. Currently, we're only 6 months into our clinic opening, so we're still in the early stages, but we're offering services for kids from a range of age 2 to 26. From early intensive intervention, and then these will be out here if people want contact information. Oh, sorry, thank you. See, you were pointing, I didn't know what you meant. Sorry. Contact information about current autism treatment programs here at the Wasteman Center. We've only been operating for about 6 months, so we're still in the early stages. There's a reference sheet that provides you what I thought were the most important links from here. And then also we have a 8-week teen parent program called Transitioning Together, and that what we're doing for our groups is collecting an interest list from families. So we may not have a guaranteed slot for you right now, but if you have an interest, call the general clinic number here, and then we will connect you with the right people. So thank you, everybody.